All right, today we're going on a journey to the very edge of life itself. We're going to explore that incredibly thin, super intelligent barrier that wraps around every single one of your cells. You know, this is the ultimate gatekeeper, the bouncer at the club of life, deciding who gets in, who stays out, and what makes life even possible in the first place.
So let's dive right in. Just so you know, this whole explainer is based on lecture materials put together by Hyder Rod for the Nursing Technology Department. So think of this as your essential guide to the fundamentals of how these membranes work.
So let's kick things off with the one question that really drives everything else we're going to talk about. How in the world does a single tiny microscopic cell manage all the traffic of molecules, nutrients, and waste? How can it possibly build a border that's both a super strong barrier and a really selective gateway? Well, let's find out.
To answer that, we've got to understand the border itself. And I'm telling you, it's not just some simple wall. It's a dynamic, it's smart, and it's a highly selective structure.
And here it is. This is the amazing structure we're going to be getting into. What you're looking at is the cell membrane. It's this thin, pliable, and elastic layer that just wraps around the entire cell, perfectly separating everything on the inside from the chaos on the outside.
So what exactly is the cell membrane, or in Arabic, al-ghisha al-khului? Well, it's an unbelievably thin barrier. We're talking only about 7.5 to 10 nanometers thick. Now, to put that in perspective, a single sheet of paper is something like 100,000 nanometers thick. And yet, this microscopic layer is in charge of regulating every single thing that moves in or out of the cell. It's incredible. So, you might be wondering, what is this powerful, super thin barrier actually made of? Let's break down its basic parts.
Okay, the membrane is basically a cocktail of three main ingredients. The biggest chunk, about 55%, is proteins, and they do most of the active work, the heavy lifting. Then about 40% is lipids, fats, which form the basic structure. And that last little 5%, that's carbohydrates, and they kind of act like little ID tags on the cell's surface.
Now, the most important lipid here is the phospholipid, or a duhun phosphatiya. This little molecule is the true architect of the membrane. You can almost think of it like a pin with a round head and two little tails.
And what's so cool here is that the phospholipid has this dual personality. The head is hydrophilic, or muhibb lil ma, which means it absolutely loves water. But the tails are hydrophobic, or kare lil ma. They're afraid of water. And this one simple fact is the entire secret to the whole structure. The water-loving heads naturally turn to face the watery environment inside and outside the cell, while the water-fearing tails automatically hide from the water in the middle. It creates this perfect self-organizing barrier, all on its own.
Okay, so we've got our barrier. Now, how do things actually get across? Let's start with the simplest way, the method that requires absolutely no effort from the cell at all.
This is what we call passive transport. The main thing to remember here is that the cell uses zero energy. Molecules just move from an area where there's a lot of them to an area where there's fewer of them. They just spread out. Think of it like coasting downhill on a bike. No pedaling required.
The most basic version of this is called simple diffusion, or al-intishar al-basit. You've seen this a million times. If you drop a sugar cube in water, the sugar molecules just naturally spread out until they're evenly mixed in. It's the exact same process that small molecules, like oxygen, use to get inside your cells. Easy.
But what about molecules that are too big? Or maybe they have an electrical charge. They can't just sneak through the fatty part of the membrane. So for them, we have something called facilitated diffusion. This is where those membrane proteins come into play. They act like special channels or selective doors, only allowing specific molecules like glucose to pass through. It's still passive, mind you. It's still moving from high to low concentration, and it still doesn't cost any energy. It just needs a little help from a protein doorway.
And there's one more special case of passive transport we need to mention, osmosis, or al-tanala. This is just a fancy word for the diffusion of water. Water is so critical to life that its movement across the membrane gets its very own name.
Okay, but what happens when a cell needs to move something against that natural flow? What if it needs to pump molecules from a low concentration area into a place that's already crowded? Well, for that, it's going to have to spend some energy.
This is active transport, or a nuclein nishet, and this is basically the cellular equivalent of pushing a giant boulder uphill. It's defined by two key things. One, it moves molecules against their concentration gradient, from low to high. And two, it requires energy. which the cell provides using a special energy molecule called ATP.
So how does this work? Well, there are special proteins called pumps that use the energy from ATP to physically change their shape. Think about it like this. ATP gives the pump a little jolt of energy. This jolt causes the pump to grab a specific molecule on one side, change its shape, and then force that molecule through to the other side, even if it's already packed over there. In fact, the super important sodium-potassium pump in your nerve cells works exactly like this.
So let's just quickly recap the two big transport systems. Passive transport costs no energy and lets stuff flow with the gradient, like rolling downhill from high to low. Active transport uses that ATP energy to push molecules against the gradient, like forcing them uphill from low to high. Simple as that.
Now, all of this pumping and moving of charged particles, it has a really fascinating side effect. It actually turns the cell membrane into a tiny biological battery.
This is known as the membrane potential. See, by constantly pumping positive ions like sodium and potassium across the membrane at different rates, the cell creates an imbalance, and this separation of charges results in a small electrical voltage right across its membrane. And believe it or not, this tiny electrical potential is what powers every single nerve impulse and muscle contraction in your body.
So we've seen what it's made of, we've seen how it works. Let's kind of zoom out now and wrap up why this elegant microscopic barrier is just so fundamental to all life.
So, at the end of the day, it really all comes down to these key functions. The membrane creates that physical separation from the outside world. It meticulously regulates what comes in and what goes out. Its receptors on the surface receive vital signals from other cells, and finally, it provides the structural integrity that holds the whole cell together.
And I'll leave you with this one final thought. We've just explored this incredible complexity that's packed into a barrier that's just a few nanometers thick. So what happens if this tiny, invisible gatekeeper fails? If its transport systems break down or its structure gets compromised? What does that actually mean for our health and for the diseases we face? It's a pretty powerful question, and it reminds us just how much life really depends on getting the little things right. Thanks for joining me.